So lads, Caitlin Clark is out injured right now, and it appears that we know, well, she's out injured with a groin injury, and it appears there is footage of how it happened. And this one's on the coach. This one seems to be on the coach, but
Stephanie White just sat down for what turned into the most tone-deaf interview about Caitlin Clark's injury. And the way she brushed off every question about her superstar has fans absolutely furious. What she said, or maybe more painfully, what she refused to say, has people wondering if she even cares about Clark's well-being at all. But before we dive into this train wreck of an interview, I need to know, do you think Stephanie White is truly the right coach for Caitlin Clark, or is she quietly holding back the league's brightest star? Let me know in the comments, because this press conference was beyond concerning.
About this groin injury and how much of an absence do you expect from her beyond today?
Yeah, late last night. I think it's very much a day-to-day thing, how she responds to treatment. I stay in my lane and let our strength and conditioning and our physical, our AT staff do what they do best. But yeah, I found out late last night, and then we'll treat it day to day.
Back-to-back a factor at all with that?
I mean, I don't know if it's a factor from a physical standpoint, from an athletic training standpoint. Certainly in my mind, it is. But at the same time, she's shown that she's tough and she's a quick healer. So we'll see.
Was it something she reported yesterday, like her pain in the left groin?
It had to have been at some point during the day, because they took her out yesterday, for the MRI. So I'm not exactly sure. I didn't hear about it until we heard from our training staff last night.
And with the MRI, did it show a strain or anything, or?
I don't. You'll have to ask our training staff.
So here we are again, dealing with another Caitlin Clark injury situation, and once again, Stephanie White's response has been absolutely baffling. Clark was ruled out with a groin injury before the Fever's matchup against the Sparks, and when White spoke to the media, she said late last night, "I think it's very much a day-to-day thing. How she responds to treatment. I stay in my lane and let our strength and conditioning and our staff do what they do best. I stay in my lane. Are you kidding me right now? This is your franchise player, the face of the entire WNBA, and when reporters ask legitimate questions about her health and availability, you're basically saying, 'Not my problem, ask someone else.' The audacity is absolutely mind-blowing. Let me break down what really happened here, because this whole situation stinks to high heaven. White admitted she found out about Clark's injury late last night and that Clark had undergone an MRI, but she wouldn't disclose the results, so your star player gets injured. Has to go for medical imaging, and you're just sitting there acting like it's no big deal. The lack of urgency and concern is honestly shocking." But here's where it gets even worse. National analyst Rachel Dita pointed out that fans have lost a little bit of trust in the Fever organization because of how they handled the Dana Bonner situation, where they kept saying it was personal reasons for weeks before finally revealing the real story. And now, we're seeing the exact same pattern with Clark's injury, vague statements, no real timeline, and a coach who seems completely disconnected from what's happening with her players. The timing of this injury is absolutely suspect. Clark was injured with just 12 seconds left in a game. The Fever had already won against the Storm when she was trying to shake free from a defender and hit the deck grimacing. So why was she even on the court in garbage time? That's a coaching decision, and it directly led to Clark getting hurt. But does White take any responsibility? Of course not. She just says she stays in her lane.
Yeah, just with Caitlin out, you're down to 9 available players, and it's the first day of a back-to-back. Just what are you doing to try and manage minutes and make sure, your starters don't get overused?
Well, I think in game it's not going to be as much about managing minutes as positioning us to win the ball game. If we're in a position where we can do that, then we will. I think more so, yesterday being off physically and having more of a mental day, and coming in today and making sure that we just highlight the high level stuff. Not overload them, so to speak, from a mental standpoint. Highlight high level stuff. Get some shots up. It's more so about what we're doing outside of game right now. And we got to say.
What makes this even more infuriating is that in 4 years of college basketball, Clark never missed a single game due to injury. But within 6 weeks of working with a professional strength and conditioning team, She's already sustained two separate injuries and now a groin issue. That's not a coincidence. That's a systematic failure of player management and conditioning protocols. The "I stay in my lane" comment has become a running theme with White, and it's honestly getting ridiculous. When asked about Clark's MRI results, she repeated the same line. When asked about her timeline for return, same response: at what point does staying in your lane become complete negligence as a head coach? You're supposed to be the leader of this team, not some passive bystander who just shrugs off responsibility. The fact that White admitted she didn't even know when Clark suffered the injury isn't exactly reassuring, and fans don't know when exactly Clark will be back on the court. She could be back for the next game against the Wings, or she could be out for a couple of weeks. This kind of uncertainty and poor communication is exactly what you don't want when you're trying to build a championship contender around a generational talent. Let's talk about the coaching decisions that led to this mess. White has been pushing the slow-paced motion offense. That completely goes against Clark's natural strengths. Clark thrives in an up-tempo system where she can use her speed and court vision to create plays in transition. Instead, White wants her playing off ball in a half-court set that reduces her impact and effectiveness. It's like having a Ferrari and insisting on driving it through a school zone.
I think the biggest thing is what we have to do as a staff to get her better looks, like higher quality looks. Every game plan is going to be to make her score inside the three-point line, right? And the different ways that they're going to do that: physicality, coverage, showing bodies, all the different things. And we have to do a better job of getting her higher quality looks. I'm not worried about Caitlin's shot. Caitlin's shot is going to be just fine. The thing I'm worried about is our 18 turnovers for 28 points.
The irony here is that when Clark was allowed to play her natural game against the Liberty earlier this season, she exploded for 32 points and handed the defending champions their first loss of the season. But instead of building on that success, White went right back to her conservative, possession-based approach that clearly doesn't work with this roster. What's even more concerning is how White handled the injury situation itself. She was left in the dark about Clark's condition and couldn't provide any meaningful updates about the severity or expected recovery time. That's not staying in your lane. That's being completely disconnected from your most important player's health and well-being. The pattern here is becoming impossible to ignore. Remember when Clark missed 5 games earlier this season with a quad injury? The communication was just as poor then, with vague timelines and minimal updates. Now we're seeing the exact same approach with this groin injury at some point. You have to wonder if White actually cares about Clark's success or she's more concerned with proving that her system works regardless of personnel. Let me paint the picture of what this interview really looked like. Reporters are asking legitimate questions about the health status of the most important player in the league, and White is basically giving them the corporate runaround. "I stay in my lane" became her catchphrase, repeated multiple times throughout the press conference whenever she was pressed for actual information. This is the same coach who was supposed to unlock Clark's potential when she was hired. Remember all the hype about how White's system would be perfect for Clark's skill set? Well, here we are months later and Clark has been injured twice, is struggling with her shot, and the team is barely above .500 some system. The most frustrating part is that this injury could have been completely preventable. Clark was playing in garbage time with the game already decided when she got hurt. Any competent coach would have pulled their stars once the outcome was clear, especially when dealing with a player who had just returned from a previous injury. But not White. She kept Clark on the floor until the very end, and now we're dealing with the consequences. Let's be honest about what's really happening here. White came to Indiana with this grand vision of implementing her motion offense system, but she's trying to force square pegs into round holes. Clark isn't built for a slow, methodical offensive approach. She's a dynamic playmaker who needs freedom to create an attack. By trying to change her game instead of adapting the system to maximize her strengths, White is essentially wasting one of the most talented players in WNBA history. The "staying in my lane" excuse is particularly galling when you consider that managing player health and availability is literally part of a head coach's job description. You're supposed to work closely with the medical staff, understand your player's physical condition, and make informed decisions about playing time and usage. Claiming ignorance about your franchise player's injury status is a dereliction of duty, not professional courtesy. What makes the situation even worse is the timing within Clark's career arc. This is her second professional season, the time when she should be building on her rookie success and establishing herself as a perennial all-star. Instead, She's dealing with recurring injuries and playing in a system that doesn't showcase her abilities. Her all-star status is now in jeopardy because of these health issues and performance struggles. The fans deserve better than this. Clark deserves better than this. She's brought unprecedented attention and revenue to the WNBA, filling arenas and driving television ratings to historic levels. In return, she gets a coach who can't keep her healthy, won't adapt the system to her strengths, and seems more concerned with protecting her own reputation than maximizing her star player's potential. The Fever went to and for without Clark, in her most recent absence, dropping to an overall record of 7-8, which shows just how dependent this team is on her production. Yet White continues to make decisions that put Clark at risk and limit her effectiveness. When she's available to play, here's what really bothers me about White's approach. She acts like she's some kind of hands-off CEO when she should be a hands-on leader. When your star player gets hurt, you don't just delegate everything to the training staff and wash your hands of it. You get involved. You ask questions. You make sure you understand exactly what's happening so you can make informed decisions about rotation minutes and game planning. But White seems perfectly content to just punt on any responsibility. I stay in my lane as code for I don't want to be held accountable for what happens to my players. That's not leadership. That's cowardice dressed up as professionalism. The media response to White's comments has been telling too. Sports journalists and analysts who cover the league regularly have expressed frustration with the lack of transparency and information coming out of Indianapolis. When the people whose job it is to report on your team are complaining about getting stonewalled, that's a sign your communication strategy is fundamentally broken. Think about how other successful coaches handle injury situations with their star players. They're involved, they're informed, and they can speak intelligently about the player's condition and timeline for return. They don't hide behind training staff and use vague corporate speak to avoid giving real answers. The disconnect between White and Clark's situation is particularly concerning when you consider that this is supposed to be a collaborative relationship. The coach and the star player should be working together closely, especially when dealing with health and performance issues. Instead, we have a coach who seems to find out about her franchise players' injuries from the training staff the night before games. What's most damning about this whole situation is how it reflects on White's priorities. When your best player gets hurt, that should be your number one concern. You should be all over the medical staff, getting updates, understanding the treatment plan, and making sure everything possible is being done to get them back on the court safely. Instead, White acts like it's not her department and she can't be bothered with the details. The contrast with how other successful coaches handle star players is stark. Look at how Eric Spoelstra manages Jimmy Butler's health, or how Steve Kerr worked with Stephen Curry during his injury-prone early years. Those coaches made it their business to understand every aspect of their star's physical condition and recovery process. That's what real leadership looks like. White's approach sends a terrible message to the rest of the team too. If the coach doesn't seem particularly concerned about the franchise player's health, what does that say about how much she values any of her players? It creates an atmosphere where players might feel like they're just expendable pieces, rather than valued members of the organization. The bottom line is that Stephanie White's handling of Caitlin Clark has been a masterclass in how not to coach a superstar. From the questionable system fit to the poor injury management to the dismissive media responses, everything about this relationship screams dysfunction. Clark came into the season with championship aspiration, but instead, she's stuck dealing with a coach who seems determined to prove her system works, even if it means sacrificing her best player's health and effectiveness. Stephanie White's handling of Caitlin Clark's injury situation is absolutely unacceptable. Her dismissive "I stay in my lane" comments show a coach who's completely disconnected from her star player's well-being. This organization needs to do better if they want to maximize Clark's incredible talent. What did you think of White's response? Let me know below and smash that like and subscribe button.